Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Serious Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or quite possibly both, thank you for listening. Today, I get to talk future of workforce and HR leadership with Ken Finneran. Ken, you're just one of those dynamic forces in HR and talent management, coming from a very strategic and global Chief Human Resources Officer roles. You've really been a trailblazer in challenging traditional HR practices and helping everyone to embrace this AI-driven transformation. I am thrilled to have you on the show today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Kristen.
Well, anytime we start with you've challenged the status quo, or I use the word trailblazer, it's always great to really dive into what's motivated you to do so.
It really comes from the business impact perspective. When we think about the greatest challenge for HR leaders and leaders in general, it is their ability to add impact to their roles and to the organization. And when we look at a lot of the HR practices that many HR leaders continue to utilize that were developed in many cases in the middle of the last century for a much different workforce and try to force apply them to the modern age, it's no wonder why many of those are adding a high level of frustration for the managers that they're working with, as well as failure rates, not success rates, but failure rates that are unfortunately very, very high. And so I think we're challenged and should be challenging ourselves to ask ourselves, is the way we've done things until now the right way? And are we using the right tools, methods, methodologies to get the best outcomes and impact for the business? And are those older tools still relevant, quite honestly?
Right. And you mentioned that they may not be relevant because the workforce has changed. The business
Absolutely.
environment has changed. What are some of those ways that it has changed that we need to rethink? This is how it's evolved and why these things just no longer align and support.
Yeah, so we had the shift, and again, not wanting to waste time that on the things that everyone knows and understands, but that shift from the agrarian economy to the more, if we think about management and white collar labor, as we often used to refer to it, knowledge workers. In that management layer, management was, as Peter Drucker said, the innovation of the 20th century that added the most value to organizations. Now we can extrapolate on that, and there were many things built around that. But I would directly to your question say some of the tools and things that we're looking for, we don't have to look far to know that our performance management system and the way it's practiced in most organizations is broken. We know that with the advancements in AI and automation and in other areas as well, that the way we approach recruiting, assessments, certainly performance management, compensation management, and the way that they all tie together into a broader, more complex talent management structure has changed dramatically. So whether it's the automation of integrated HRIS systems, whether it is looking at succession through a different lens so that we don't just have the same 7 or 8 people on everybody's list, and looking at contributions in a skills-based economy, we can get to that discussion as well. I think that is a shift that we've experienced as well. But also being able to leverage the AI tools is much different than just an initial approach to a knowledge worker economy that differentiated itself from the more physical labor economy of the past. Now we're into an economy that we can think about what should it be called, but digital economy, if you will. And that then needs other tools that we as leaders, including HR leaders, need to embrace in order to get the most value for ourselves, our employees, in the company.
you mentioned there's a lot there. I want to unpack. I wrote down a few items. I want to start with the skills part of it because I think that's one of the biggest
Yeah.
challenges that I see business leaders struggling with is what skills do I need? And does my current workforce have those skills? And as simple as that seems, it's not that simple in actually getting to the answer of that. What are some practical ways or some guidance that when you step into organizations, you're helping them identify what those skills are? Because as the business evolves and as the macro environment evolves, we have to evolve those skills. And the job description isn't it. The old performance management, what should be that guiding light and some practical steps to what skills does my organization need? And then aligning to those.
Yeah, great question. And I'll start with something that may sound provocative in its simplicity, is that the answer is really there is not an organization that has yet uncovered a way to have a fully skill-based workforce with the skills needed for now in the future. That would be the provocative statement. The reason why is that the business landscape is changing too fast, faster than we've ever experienced, and the training, the skill building, the reskilling and upskilling that we've utilized has not been able to keep pace. So that leads us to say one of the skills that we need to enhance, and that is probably the most in-demand skill for employees as well as leaders, is agility. That's
Mm.
both learning agility and the dealing with change. I think we did ourselves a big disservice by putting change management, which I would question if change management ever existed, either as a practice. If so, it certainly wasn't a best practice since 70% of those efforts failed. And as a result, we focus so much on telling people that change was scary, change was hard, rather than developing the set of skills needed, communication skills, developing more a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out. We've got this exciting new project, we've got this exciting new way of doing things. And instead, we told people change is hard, change is difficult, change is scary, and we created our own defeatist mentality. So agility and learning agility, as well as agility to deal with changes as they happen, that includes business changes, business environment changes. Um, that is a part of it. So another skill we need, and this is the hard skill that HR leaders in particular have a role in, especially if learning and development is part of their domain.
Yeah.
And some it is directly, some it is in collaboration with a learning and development team, but it is recognizing and getting buy-in that continuous learning, reskilling, upskilling, for every individual is going to be a key component for maintaining competitive advantage in the future. If you are not learning, if you are not improving, if you are not enhancing, you are falling behind, both individually, as a team, and as an organization. So how do we build processes that allow for that? How do we set learning capabilities in place? That can be as simple as and embrace things such as AI that can help with that, but also more standard learning capabilities such as listening to podcasts and then measuring that. What have you learned over the last month, over the last week, over the last year that has allowed you to positively impact your role, your team, and the organization? Those are the questions we should be asking rather than tell me what was your favorite part of the last year in your role. That doesn't get to the core of what we should be measuring or to the value added for individuals in the business. So those would be a couple of things. We can unpack that more, but those are just a couple of initial responses to that question.
you hit on a trend that we're seeing in small to mid-sized businesses. These are businesses that have no HR person or office manager is still responsible, but they have a partial or dedicated learning and development role. And we're seeing that you just gave some great suggestions for how do you make learning, not just education, but just learning
Mhm.
part of the culture. And it doesn't necessarily, there are some great programs out there on to be able to log in platforms for educating. We don't need to necessarily build that knowledge library that used to take
That's
companies
right.
3 years to build. You just mentioned podcasts.
Absolutely.
What did we learn from them? And there's so much content that is already available out there, just encouraging it, making part of the culture to continually be learning and evolving.
100%. And that harkens me back to a podcast I did. Now it's probably been about a year ago, called Power Skills for Success. And we intentionally named it that. It was the inaugural podcast with a colleague, Anna Gandrabura, and we were talking about what I termed power skills, used to be referred to as soft skills. And again, the way we name things matters. And when you think of soft, there's nothing soft about them. They're the primary determinants of success in careers today. So when you think about what has changed, it used to be enough, even in a knowledge worker economy, to learn an area of expertise. It was encouraged even to hoard knowledge, learn and then hoard that knowledge. That was what gave you job security. None of those things hold true today. You can go on and learn on podcasts, on YouTube, on many of the other open source tools that are out there, a whole host of skills, abilities, capabilities, hard skills. But it is then going to be how able and capable am I to apply those through problem solving, communication, presentation skills, influencing skills, all of those that we used to call soft skills, but now are recognized as those key levers for growing, advancing, and ultimately reaching higher levels within most organizations today.
Yeah, it feels as though it used to be the you learned something, you got signed off on the training, and we all pat each other on the back. Everyone's trained. They completed this course, woohoo. And what used to be continuous improvement has now evolved into continuous learning.
100%. So continuous learning, lifelong learning, more so than just a concept. It is now coming back to the agility. The learning agility is, in my mind, one of the, if not the central tenet of success for this new AI age, or the digital transformation age, if we want to put a term like that on it.
What we're seeing with that is we also then go to the knowledge age of it's not just knowing how to use those, it's what do we do with that information and on a new and different level and for the
Uh,
purpose of what?
Yeah, I love that. So we enter that knowledge age, and yet now, how do you get from knowledge to wisdom, or knowledge to applied knowledge? And that's really what we're talking about. There's no shortage of knowledge out there. It's why the generative AI tools have been so relevant in terms of leading to higher productivity, because they're leveraging knowledge bases of thousands of years or hundreds of years, depending on which ones, that they're able to pull from in seconds. And yes, while there's still some hallucination within those tools, they're not perfect, and they need a human in the loop in order to be successful. But they are great. But how do we get, and these are the human skills of applying that knowledge to taking it and saying, where is it pulling from? Does that output make sense? And how then can I use that to tell a story around that? Those are the things where the human is adding value, even to the value add that's by created by the AI tool, the generative AI tools that are out there.
In coming from a global human resource background, it's easy to talk about this power skills in theory and here's what you need to look for in the agility, but there's still a gap right now in manufacturing jobs. And it doesn't necessarily help me today say, again, I can't find welders. I can't find production managers to work the night shift. And I can't take someone from here to there because they don't have the skill set. And teaching them how to be more agile doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily teach them that skill that they need to be able to move from here on the production line to there. How do you take some of what we're talking about and apply it in those situations where we've got a real true problem?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in the manufacturing environment, you're exactly right. We have a shortage of individuals going into those areas of study. We have a big push by the federal government, state governments for apprenticeships right now. And I encourage any company looking to hire entry-level talent to embrace those, to really buy into those. But very, very concretely, we need to do a better job really early on. And I'm thinking K through 12, just to be very clear, not just at the college level, of talking about not everybody is destined to become, it used to be doctor or lawyer that we talked about. Now maybe that's an AI engineer or whatever individuals are aspiring to right now. The reality is that those are important jobs that we need in order for our economy to function. And it shouldn't be that we put a valuation on a role. There are outstanding welders, plumbers, electricians, and I use those only as examples, and you can do that across any role. But we need individuals to find where do they have a passion for that. And there are tools we can utilize, including AI tools that help individuals discover those passions, where they would be great, where is there a need in the market, and then to apply those skills when they go to a course of study, when they then come out of that. And when we think of transferable skills, it's also saying those individuals oftentimes have a hard time using LinkedIn or Indeed or other tools to find that next opportunity. How do we create and leverage AI for creating a database of skills and skills enhancement, the same way that we as professionals have our certifications, whether that's a CPA for accounting, a SHRM certification for HR, whatever that is, they know because they've grown from an apprenticeship to a master level to whatever that is, a master welder, etc. Why not showcase those and have ways to have them take that with them from job to job as well? The same way that we're able to showcase advances in title and any certifications that we as other professionals get, that's just not as common in those areas. We need to do a better job, not just highlighting professional certifications, but highlighting those certifications for those types of jobs as well. That would be one thing. Now, how do you find those? How do you develop that? It is talking about those and making those as desirable to go in to as a career field as you do for doctors, lawyers, and tech professionals. That sounds very high level, but it can be as simple as saying, look, if you want to have the food delivered, everything that is produced needs to get somewhere. We need those truck drivers. Everything needs to be produced. If you're drinking, and I worked for National Beverage in the past, if you're drinking LaCroix sparkling water, as many of us do, well, guess what? That was produced here in the US, but it had to be transported. It had to be made on a line filled in the cans, packaged accordingly, and then brought to whatever store you happen to buy it at nationally. These are great opportunities for many individuals. And so manufacturing as a career can be very, very fulfilling. It coming back to what I said earlier, I think we need to think about how can we create more FOMO? How do we make these jobs exciting? And if you're not in one of them, guess what? For a lot of people, being a lawyer is very boring. And guess what? For many lawyers, being someone on a production line is very boring. That's okay. For many other individuals, being in HR may sound boring for them. But a lot of people can get excited about any one of those. And we need to do a better job of bringing in those individuals who can make those opportunities sound exciting.
I can see the creativity going on right now as far as how do we, in career pathing, how do we create clarity around what does that job progression look like? I had someone say to me recently, it was very in the accounting field saying, I don't ever want to be a manager, so I'm going to be in this job the rest of my life because in order to progress, I've got to be a manager. And we saw that during COVID. We've seen that the last 10 years is people think that's the only way to progress my career. And then they hate being a manager versus what they really love doing. And I can see you as the trailblazer really laying out, here's all the opportunities. And as you get in each subject matter expertise role, I think any company, no matter how small you are, can really make that exciting of here's a badge because you just mastered this skill.
Yes. Yes. So again, even as we think about language, I keep coming back to that. And we in HR used to call that the career ladder. Shame on us, meaning
Thank you.
we only
Thank
saw
you.
one path, and that path was up. And so your desired path should be moving from coordinator to specialist to senior, whatever that was, to manager, to director, to VP. And luckily, we've started changing the mindset by talking about things like a career lattice. So a spider web. It can go up, down, sideways, and your career can take, as many successful individuals' careers have gone, they've had different experiences, and it's not always following the ladder approach. And I think that's very healthy. But you're right. I think how do we then start thinking about careers? I've heard that same thing, and I have two college age children who are saying, I have a lot of passion. But it's my desire isn't necessarily being that manager. And I think one of the other benefits of the AI driven era, that digital age that we're in right now, is I foresee by 2030, we will be having very serious discussions about the future of management in general. I think we're going to see a much greater discussion of having an AI partner as your primary manager. I think we're going to see much more discussion around self-driven, self-regulated, self-managed teams. And then we will still have elements of leadership, but that's more at senior levels that I think we're actually going to see through the effective implementation of AI and chatbots and AI tools, AI management tools, even a drastic decrease by somewhere, if I had to put numbers on it, 50 to 75% of managerial roles will be eliminated over the next 5 years, in my estimation.
And I'd be surprised if it's 5 years, not to date our discussion here, but we've already seen news releases on a very large company going in that direction and laying off a large number of managers for the purpose of we want more agile teams. We want decision making quicker. We want to bring out creativity. And removing, you just said that manager role was the biggest invention of organizational hierarchy in the last century. This century, very early on, seems to be moving away from that.
I think that's right. Yes, absolutely.
and we get into the self-managed teams, there's a lot. Started with the future workforce, and there's a
Yeah.
number of the large consulting companies coming out with what does the future of the workforce and how do we need to adjust organizationally to meet that workforce. Whereas we've traditionally said, how do we need to organize our workforce to meet the company? Two very different things to say. We now need to organize our company to meet the workforce where they're at. And one of them being that cross-functional, almost self-managed teams, and not based on tasks, but based on what do we need them to accomplish?
Yeah, that very last point is, I think, the key point. I think very much we're in the process of looking at outcomes driven
Mhm.
leadership, outcomes driven org structures, not just task driven. I love the way that you frame that around the structure of teams and how we're now organizing. And I think it's really pertinent to the discussion around the future of work, because now we are more focused on what are the outcomes we desire and how do we reward, structure, etc. around those outcomes. And guess what? It's also going to be technology and AI empowered, enabled. As you can probably tell, am a technology optimist. I am an AI optimist, and not everyone is. And yet, I do believe, and let me qualify that, responsible AI. And for me, to take that one step further, the A in that AI is not artificial. Shame on those who came up with the term. It should be augmented. And I think we did ourselves a big disservice and created a lot of fear, hesitation, the idea of sentience, and are they going to take over these AIs? When we called it that, rather than aligning around a fantastic new set of tools, which is what they are, tools,
Mhm.
that are augmentation tools. They are here, and if applied responsibly, to help us become more effective, productive, etc., in the tasks we are doing with a human in the loop. So that is the key, the way that I view it. And as we think about that future of work, how can we start with embedding these augmentation tools
Mhm.
to allow us to be more effective in our roles? And if we do that as leaders and as employees, I think we will see huge leaps in productivity.
And it's not even that far off. You and I can remember back to, remember our entire employee base was on an Excel spreadsheet. I'll really date myself and
Absolutely.
say a Quattro Pro spreadsheet,
Yeah,
but an Excel spreadsheet. And then we manually entered information into that spreadsheet. Forms were filled out. And then database and HRIS systems came along. And it really, what that completely changed the landscape of how we held managed information, how we interacted, how we communicated, how everything connected. It eliminated any number of HR administrative roles.
that's right.
Not that different of a leap to now, how are we leveraging the AI tools? And yes,
I
both will be,
agree.
and that wasn't that long ago
No, it was
that we
not.
were managing employees on spreadsheets.
Indeed. I remember those times very vividly. Yes.
And looking at that same transition, you mentioned at the beginning, and this I know there's going to be a hot button here, is performance evaluations. You just mentioned this has to. I do a lot of speaking,
Yeah.
and I've asked a number of business leaders who here loves doing performance evaluations. I don't think I've ever had one person raise their hand. This is the bane of most existence. Yet
Yeah,
the employees, their number one thing they wanted, where do I stand?
exactly.
How am I being how do I know what I need to accomplish and how am I doing on the way to there? That's a pretty big disconnect, Ken.
It's a huge
In
disconnect.
your trailblazing efforts, what do you see as that evolution of how do we fix that?
So it's a big question that there are a lot of opinions on. I can tell you a couple of things that generally have pretty broad acceptance when they're fully thought through. And it's if you ask most leaders, why do you do performance evaluations? You'll get one of two questions. So to gain alignment and have a scoring so that I can then compensate someone, or to have strategic cascading of goals so that the organization is aligned. And maybe it's both of those things. Or it can be to weed out poor performers and to have differentiation. Well, I'm not sure that any of those are good answers, to be quite frank. I think when you ask employees, they too want to, they are thirsty for feedback. Most of the time, their frustration is we do these sessions as a once a year or twice a year exercise, and I have no feedback between then and the next time I do it. So it's not really performance management, so let's not pretend it is. That's generally the feedback. So a couple of ways that generally for everyone are aha moments. One, get rid of the ratings. The ratings don't really help. If you're using ratings to drive compensation, then it's not performance management, it's compensation management, and you should be doing that elsewhere anyway. Separate the two. And one of the easiest ways is to not have a 5-point, 7-point, whatever your rating scale is. Get rid of those. Encourage, and this sounds counterintuitive, more frequent interaction. If you're really worried and wanting to drive performance, that should be daily, weekly, bi-weekly interactions. It's as close to the actions on the projects. We know we're getting more and more doing more and more project-based work. So let's give regular feedback on the project-based work. Let's encourage individuals in their roles and as they are developing to say, part of the expectation is that if you are encountering any blockers, if you are encountering any issues, the expectation is that you will raise those. And don't fear that as you raise them, it's going to hurt your performance. Just the opposite. We want to all succeed together. And that's part of that whole shift of hoarding information. If I don't know everything, I'm not good. No, it's you coming and saying, I can't seem to get the information from X team, whatever that team is. Can you help me get that? Or I'm running into a problem with this technology. Can you assist? That is the team-based approach that's going to help with that. But more importantly, it's the regular feedback that they need. I honestly think we'd be very well served doing away with them entirely. And what I mean by that, the performance reviews, the way they are done now, don't really add value. An annual process that's used as a check the box exercise because the government asks us to do it or someone else asks us to do it, isn't really helpful. If you want to drive performance, we know that that is based on alignment, goal setting, alignment, regular feedback. It's not some magic that we need to dream up. It then is, how do we get, in this case, leaders and teams to, whether it's self-regulating, self-managing, and individuals to be part of that growth and feedback? How do we have group and team accountability? We've, for a long time, said the only accountability has been manager over an employee. That's wrong. That is very outdated. And so how do we encourage self-accountability, team accountability, and that then feeds into organizational achievement and overall organizational accountability? So for what it's worth, those would be a couple of thoughts. Definitely, if the organization is able to embrace it, get rid of ratings early on, and again, move to a more frequent cadence of project-based feedback, which is probably how 90% or more of organizations are working already, yet their feedback structure isn't aligned to that.
I've always loved structuring work on a project basis because there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, there's a chance to look back and do a postmortem. What can we do differently, or what can we do next time? You reset, you improve, and then you start the next. It's what we've seen technology go to with the agile workflows, any number of those. And on a project, you can also stop and say, what do I need to accomplish this? Who should be involved? It's a little harder when you're doing it in motion constantly. There's no beginning or end, and it's just ongoing. When do you do that reset? When you have that check-in. So the project based, you can look at it in so many ways of organizing work to then what's the expected outcome of this project? Did it go that way?
That's right. That's right. And if we think about it, even from the pace of change that we started our discussion with, I know in my current organization, if we did that only once a year, we're already in our second, maybe even third business cycle, a year out, 12 months out from now. And so it's not really business outcome supporting if we only do it once a year. So being more project-based, having those ongoing discussions with team members and having it related to things that are happening in the business. If your company is acquiring other businesses, integrating other businesses, launching new products, introducing whole new ways of working, implementing new ERP systems, etc., use that as an opportunity for realignment, re-engagement, check-ins, and not just waiting for this time where, oh my gosh, I've got until the end of the month now, I have to fill these out. And again, that's not really helping because most managers can't remember what was good or bad. There's the recency bias and many other issues with the way that those performance reviews are currently being done, those just being a few of them.
I get to sit down and fill out performance reviews, or I get to sit down and fill out checklists and forms. No one has ever said I get to, it's an I have to. And if it's causing that much friction, it's causing friction for a reason. There's a mindset shift in a lot of what you're talking about here, and that forward looking. One is a lot of what you just said, that word team came up a lot. And most organizations, especially small organizations, are structured as individuals. You mentioned that. And in order to understand what does the company need to accomplish, how do we align the work and the people to that, that puts a lot more ownership on leadership to come up with where's the company going and what needs to be accomplished. Are you seeing a mindset shift there at the leadership level?
In the best run companies, yes. And I say that intentionally, and I'm sure heard the pause there, because I think that's one of the leadership mindset shifts that has to happen in order to become successful in this new age. And yet many aren't making the leap, the mindset leap. I see a lot of companies that are still trying to run their businesses the way the CEO's first successful role in 1990 or 2000 may have been, and now they're struggling massively with that because they have these work processes and mindsets that may have worked at that time. But I think the other thing that is being realized more than ever is that the time shift, the times we are in, require a constant adaptation. And we have to become, again, going back to the agility, agile enough as leaders to embrace, yes, we need to set the direction. We need to communicate, not just the way we've always done, saying, here's the direction, managers go out and communicate this to the team. More than ever, that's the role of the leadership team, to constantly be reinforcing that. This is our strategic direction. This is how we're delivering on those promises. These are the pathways we're taking. And guess what? These are the guardrails we've put in place. Also very important, especially in this age of digital disruption. What are those guardrails? We're in the digital healthcare space. So ERISA sets rules, HIPAA sets rules, GDPR sets rules. And thankfully so, but we need to know, as we are embracing these technologies, what are those guardrails for how we use those for our benefit? What can we share? What information can we put into those tools? All of that needs to be set by leadership. And those that do so successfully and continue to communicate that to the teams, they're the ones who generally have the best outcomes, but also the ones who constantly are searching for feedback. And that's the other piece, coming to the other piece we were just talking about. That feedback goes both ways. It's no longer the managerial one-way feedback. There are a number of companies out there who said, I'm not interested in a 360. I'm not interested in the employee doing a self-review. All I need to check the box is the manager to do the review, one way, one person, one opinion. And that has to change as well. How are we, coming back to the team concept, how are we succeeding? And yes, there are individual contributors, but how are we as individuals, as teams, and as a company together succeeding? So yes, it is those leaders who embrace that the most, who communicate that the most, and most importantly, who live that the most. What I mean by that, and you know this all too well, it became almost in vogue to say the right thing or have the right things printed. And yet, oftentimes, leaders of organizations were not only held to a different standard, but lived via a different standard. That congruence is more critical than ever. If you say we are behaving in a certain fashion, and my expectation is that it's not just you, it's that we behave in that certain fashion and go together in that certain direction. That more than ever, and certainly much more so than 20 years ago when it was all about, gold faucets and corner offices, that has changed to be much more about that congruence, leadership with team to get to that next level.
A lot of this is communication, but you just talked about communication needs to be really a feedback loop. I'm hearing this come up more and more as I talk to HR leaders versus, say, finance or operations leaders. And we've seen this the last 2 years. Last 2 years, and that I don't know that I've placed as many interim CHR roles for the purpose of creating a communication plan between leadership and the rest of the company and creating those feedback loops as the last 2 years. That is this, I know it's not something new, but it's new to the top of the conversation list.
It is, and I think we've seen that shift, and we've heard much more talk about culture and culture fit over the last 20 years. That was oftentimes very vague. We look for those individuals who support the culture and the values of the organization, and yet it wasn't very tangible for most organizations. And yet now I think you're right. The communication, the living of the culture. You have, whether it was Gen Y and certainly Gen Z coming into the workforce who in Gen Alpha as well now, who are much more interested also in that social impact, the idea of an organization as part of society. And it was organizations and leaders within organizations complete misunderstanding that they are a separate entity from a society that led to many of the issues that we still face today, in some of the distrust that has been created in corporate America, rather than embracing their role as a part of society and an integral part of society with employees, teams, et cetera, and the responsibilities that come along with that. That's a whole another discussion for another day, but an important one, that I think we are now realizing, and leaders are realizing, the best ones at least, that yes, it is the communication, yet it is embracing and I'll call it corporate social responsibility, the CSR, or at least a social impact. And this isn't always fighting for DEI initiatives, and it's not always fighting for climate change, whatever the topic is that is most relevant, but recognizing their role as an employer is not only about the business outcome, that the business outcome has a societal impact. And that is a shift that needs to be communicated. And the better they are at communicating that and being one of those top workplaces. So that then becomes a branding tool. That becomes a tool for alignment. We are, because of our role as one of the top companies, we are able to attract the top talent. We are able to achieve superior outcomes. Through our better engagement, we have higher levels of trust. We are able to make decisions quicker. We are able to have higher levels of profitability than other peers, if you will, or companies in our segment. All of those can be true if the leaders are the ones communicating regularly and embracing their role of culture, values, champions for engagement, and many of these other things.
The communication, the culture is probably one of the leading discussions that we're seeing out there. We're seeing keynotes in the speaking circuit. We're seeing it in consulting. We're seeing it in advising on how to define it, as if you don't, everyone else will, and you end up with multiple. How do you integrate it in? How do you make that make it a guiding light? The other topic that I've seen come up more than I have in the past couple of decades with business leaders and especially business owners is that you brought it up at the beginning, succession planning.
Oh, yeah.
Planning for and you brought it up in a slightly different way than I've heard most talk about it, and that is so it's not the same 8 people.
That's
You've
right.
got a plan, not for the what if someone gets hit by a bus or what if this happens, but for another purpose. I'd love for you to talk more about that.
So succession planning is another one of those things. You know, the 9-box is probably one of the most popular HR tools utilized, and it's the way it has commonly been utilized is performance and potential. Unfortunately, potential in most organizations is defined as performance over time. So you are measuring performance and then wondering why you're falling short and only have the same 7 or 8 people on everyone's scorecard. That's why I made that comment earlier. I think as we shift our thinking around succession to, yes, we do need to think about, for the senior level leaders, not only is there someone prepared to step in should something happen, but how are we building capability organization-wide? And that's that continuous learning we've already talked about, that lifelong learning. But it's also, what does that learning look like at the different levels and targeted to the different levels? Does that include, and I would strongly encourage organizations to embrace coaching and mentoring as key components for that learning, especially at senior levels, but even at mid-level, if possible, developing individuals even internally to become peer coaches or if you have a licensed executive coach on staff, to create a corporate program internally to have them continuously going around. All of those are some great strategies for how to develop those leaders. But succession is ultimately about, do we have the individuals prepared to handle the problems of the future, first being able to identify them, identify the direction, identify our approach, and to bring on other individuals who can help us get there and remain at either achieve greatness or remain at the forefront of our industry.
Mhm.
That approach is very seldom, and this is very seldom going to be with the same group of leaders. And most organizational leaders don't yet recognize that. So I will say, I would go so far as to say an organization's top 25 leaders will look much different in 2030 than what it looks like today. And it should. And that much different, much is a relative term, will and should look at least 50% different than what it looks like today, because the challenges for that organization are different. What that means is we also need to, from an HR perspective, get rid of an outdated retention metric only that is one of the top 3 metrics typically measured for by and for every HR team, and realize that the teams in place today have gotten us, yes, to where we are today, but may not be the right teams to get us to where we need to be tomorrow. And there's nothing wrong with that. That realization of, not only are we moving to having, yes, a culture and values, a guiding light, to use some of those phrases, a beacon that tell us how we behave, to give us a strategic direction of where our focus is going to be, but recognizing that core talents within that leadership team may not be the same ones we need for the next area that's going to allow us to do that next quantum leap, even within our own industry from where we are today. And that's a big mindset shift, a big,
Very big. And especially when you start to look at the whole picture of what we've discussed and how interrelated it is, I hear top 25 leaders, like, well, that's a pretty big organization for top 25 leaders. Well, not necessarily, not when you have a team approached, because all of those leaders may not be currently on the leadership team or managers. They could be
100%.
team leaders, they could be individual contributors. That leadership concept of what is a leader, and not tied to how many people they're managing and the performance of that team that they're managing, it all starts to come together and make a lot more sense in that, which is why that makeup of my top 25 is not following that ladder. It's following a lattice work as the company evolves. So I think when you step back and say, how do those pieces come together? It's not, it is certainly forward thinking, but that mind, we don't have to shift here, shift there, shift there. It's one mind shift of looking at what's the outcome and how do we get there, makes it much easier to see. I can see why that term trailblazer, the future, crystal ball. I love when someone is bold enough to say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and this year, this is what it will look like, because you're able to see all the patterns. And we don't have to continually shift and change every 6 months
That's right.
if we're just continually learning, developing, evolving, and we've got an organizational structure that's fluid. You just get rid of the word change. Ken, thank you so much. I can see all the different things that we can collaborate on in the future. This is just incredible foresight. I'm going to look forward to these ongoing discussions saying, you remember we predicted that? Yeah, it actually happened 3 years sooner than we thought.
Exactly.
I am going to enjoy this.
Absolutely. Well, Kristen, it's been a true pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out and I look forward to our collaboration.
Fantastic. Until next time.
Take care.